Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Speaking Truth to Power, the new progressive voice of the Midwest. I'm Denise Kirchoff.
And I'm Dr. Nakpangi Thomas.
And like we've told you every Sunday, we want you to be witnesses to history. So no matter what they write, you will know what it is. And today, our guest is Senator Jeff Irwin. For those of you who don't know, Jeff Irwin represents the 18th District in Michigan, which is part of the 53rd House District. Along with that, he represents Washtenaw County, which includes Ann Arbor, Saline, Ypsilanti Township, Milan. I'm trying to remember here, Jeff, and I'll actually have to look at my notes here. York Township and Superior Township. And Jeff is actually from Mackinac. For nope, not Mackinac. Sault Ste. Marie. Did I get that right, Jeff? Hello, Jeff.
No, we cannot hear you just yet. Let me see if it's on our
And
end.
or is it on your end? Jeff, can you hear us?
Yeah, he can hear us. I can see that he can hear us, but we can't hear you on our end.
Are you muted, Jeff? Okay. Well, we will finish telling you about Jeff while our engineers try to correct our volume problem right now. For those of you who don't know, Jeff actually went to U of M. And after attending U of M and getting a degree in political science, his family decided to move down this way. So Jeff lives out in Ann Arbor with his wife and his two lovely children. And he actually he's done a lot of things. When we get down, I really want to talk about Bill 945, which is Jeff knows a lot about because I think he was a sponsor of that particular bill. But Jeff does a lot of environmental work. He does a lot of work in mental health. And for those of you who might not know, Jeff did some work with expungement also. So, Jeff, can we hear you yet? We had you for a second. What? Are we going to be able to get Jeff in here, guys?
I'm not sure what's going on, but usually when there's a technical issue, it's not on our end. It's usually on our guest end. Um, Jeff, do us a favor, log out and then log back in and see if that works. Thank you.
And while Jeff is doing that, I have a PSA announcement I'd like to read. As we battle the COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that
Go ahead, finish.
it's clear that misinformation can be just as deadly as the awful virus and spread just as quickly. Myths are spreading. Myths are spreading on the internet and social media. So it's important to know the facts to keep our community healthy. The vaccines offered through Wayne County Public Health are scientifically proven to be safe. It's important that each of us get vaccines scheduled as soon as possible. Visit the waynecounty.com/ COVID-19 to get the latest information. You want to
Mhm.
read?
Yeah, and you are watching in. Wait, I have two different shows. You're watching Speaking Truth to Power on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, and Periscope. Please like, share, and subscribe and comment. Denise, no, sit down. All our stuff here is fine. It's not us. It's not our end. It's has some
Okay.
technical
We are
issue.
actually
So
we
calm
are all right. We are actually waiting for Jeff to come back. And
But in the meantime, let's talk a little bit about his platform because he has several important issues that I like about his platform.
mhm. Oh,
The
we have Jeff back. Jeff.
No, he's not. Hey, Jeff, can we hear you?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
All
So
right, wonderful.
to somebody to reconnect and technology, you have to love it, right?
So right. So Jeff, we've just introduced you, but what I think people need to understand is that Jeff also works on the Senate Appropriation Committee, the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, Senate Oversight Committee. He's the minority vice chair and joint committees on administrative rules. And Jeff, I would like for you to talk about Bill 945,
Well,
if you
actually,
don't mind.
before he does that, let's tell our audience a little bit about you And really, why did you get into politics?
Yeah, sure. As Denise mentioned, I'm originally from the Upper Peninsula, and I came down to the Ann Arbor area to come to the University of Michigan. And I liked to talk and argue. I figured I'd probably go to law school. But then when I was pursuing my undergraduate education, I started getting involved in activism around preventing homelessness and helping people who are struggling with poverty, activism around affordable housing, and activism around environmental issues and trying to get ahead of climate change. 20, 30 years ago when it didn't feel quite as far down the road as it does now. And, what I realized was that in doing that work, I found it incredibly gratifying. I found that when I was able to, help people, say with maybe their affordable housing or with struggling against the landlord, that was just incredibly satisfying work. And so that led to me seeing that there was a seat open on the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners. And I thought, you know what, here is a great way for me to make sure that we have more affordable housing in Washtenaw County, to make sure that we build a new homeless shelter. I'll run for office. And I sort of didn't know what I had to lose at the time, but now 20 years later, I realize it was nights and weekends.
And family life, right?
Yeah, well, I feel incredibly fortunate to serve, and Denise mentioned committees I serve on in Lansing, and a lot of the work that people focus on that legislators do is about policy and budgets, writing the laws, and how do we spend our money, and that's incredibly important. And I find that exhilarating and interesting, and I participate in that aggressively. However, I also want to remind folks that part of what legislators are here for is also just to help citizens navigate the systems of state government. And over the course of the last year, we've had a tremendous volume of work just trying to help people get information about COVID, to make sure that people who are struggling with unemployment or who maybe had a small business and was struggling with how to apply for federal support, just to provide those types of connections for people in the community who need it and who deserve that kind of support and service from their elected officials.
Yes, that's great because sometimes people don't know what resources are available to them. So it's good that our legislators are here to provide that service. But you had a question.
Right. Well, one of the things I wanted to say is because I live in Washington County and I'm aware of this. It's like we've had a lot of people that had issues with unemployment, and everybody said, "Well, call Jeff's office. Call Jeff's office," and he could do a little bit, but it was just. And I would see people on Facebook just glad that they were able not to get a machine on the phone, that they were actually able to talk to someone from your office and try to navigate, unemployment, because there were people who were 3 and 4 months behind, and they're behind, waiting for payments, and they were behind in their bills. So and like you say, it's policy, but it's also letting the constituents that you represent know that, what, if you actually call me, you'll be able to get me or someone from my office on the phone. So I did want to give you a kudos on that. And one of the things I think people should know is that you worked on was the dioxin plume, that you actually help write the legislation on like the polluter pay and things like that. So I really would like for you to talk about that and some of the new things you're doing, like the expungement.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, one of my first interests in politics was protecting clean air and clean water. And, as a young person growing up in a beautiful state like Michigan and getting to enjoy the Great Lakes and getting to enjoy what are some of the most high quality state parks in the entire country, that caused me to fall in love with the environment here in Michigan. But what I learned when I got a little bit older was I learned more about environmental justice, and I learned more about how and where and why polluting facilities get located and why landfills land in certain communities. And I became passionate about this idea that we need to protect public health against the negative effects of pollution. And all of us have probably lost a loved one to cancer, and we need to do more to protect our bodies and our families and our communities against the negative effects of pollution. And one of the things that I set to work on here in Michigan was to make sure that we do a better job of just holding polluters accountable. One of the big reasons why we have such a legacy of pollution in our state, aside from our relatively early industrial development, is because our laws in Michigan make it too easy for a polluter to harm the environment, pollute the river, pollute the lake, and then escape behind the corporate veil and not have to be responsible financially for those environmental crimes. And those environmental crimes tend to hit poorer communities, tend to hit communities of color harder. And so, this is an incredibly important issue that we've been working on in my office to try to say, let's improve our laws. Let's make sure that when someone pollutes the environment, that they're held to account. And just to get into a little bit more of the detail, the way Michigan's law works now, after our original polluter pay law in the 1980s was weakened, we really only require polluters to clean up their pollution as much as is economically feasible and as much as is preventing immediate hazards to human health. But we know that sometimes these pollution plumes stick around for a long time. They fester in the ground. They move from one site to another. And by the time that they move from one person's land to pollute another person's drinking water, the person who was responsible and really should have ought to cleaned it up, they might be long gone. They might be dead. The company that they ran might be bankrupt. And so that's why we have gas stations and dry cleaners all over the state that are unaddressed, polluting our water. And that's why we have some of these big outrageous sites like the dioxane plume in Ann Arbor, or like the green ooze in Madison Heights, or like some of these old auto plants that have been abandoned and now the autos are sitting on them because they haven't done what it takes to clean them up to bring them back to beneficial use.
Now, tell us about Line 5, because I see that you're very active on Line 5, and I think I'm extremely active. Evict Enbridge, shut down Line 5.
I just want Denise to get out of my head, because that was the next question that I was going to ask you.
Because Jeff is a big proponent of Line 5 and the danger it can do. His family lives in that area. He's seen what it can do. He's heard about it. And he knows people that it's affected like we all do. And that's a very sad thing to say, that we live in this huge state. And if you go onto your Facebook and just start talking to people, I bet you're going to find at least 2 people you're friends with that have actually had direct effect or have had their family affected by Line 5. And that's really interesting. But tell us your stance on that, Jeff.
Yeah, so Line 5, for folks who don't know, is a pipeline that runs through Michigan. It primarily carries oil from Alberta in Canada to Sarnia in Canada. And it takes a shortcut through Michigan, and it crosses the Straits of Mackinac right just to the west of the Mackinac Bridge. So if you know right where that is, you know that the Straits of Mackinac is a special and beautiful, majestic place. And it's not just beautiful, but it's an area of open water where the currents are incredibly complex, and where if there was some sort of disaster, you just couldn't put that genie back in the bottle. An oil spill in any body of water is dangerous and a problem. But in that special of an area where the currents are that complex, the Coast Guard has said, look, if there's a spill or an accident there's just going to be no cleaning that up, and it's going to devastate miles and miles of shoreline, and it's going to be a big problem. So, for many years, and I think I was the first legislator to introduce any legislation on this back in 2015, we started to sound the alarm to say, look, this pipeline has been in the ground since 1953. So it was designed to last about 50 years. It's now been about 68 years. And you know what happens, to people around the time they get to that age, they start leaking. Well, this pipeline hasn't leaked under the actual straits that we know of, but along the line of the pipeline, we know that it's leaked over 1 million gallons since we started keeping track in 1968. So, pipelines do have problems, and, this particular pipeline is located in a place where it really should have never been put and shouldn't continue to be. It's past its design life. The easement that the state granted to allow Enbridge to put that pipeline there is being violated in a number of ways, not just the longevity of the pipeline, but also the positioning and location of the anchor supports, which are supposed to be there. And now we're starting to see, we just saw in recent years, some anchor strikes that hit the pipeline, which is very concerning. So, there's been a lot of us who have been saying for years, we need a new plan. We need to reroute that pipeline traffic either north of Lake Superior or south of Lake Michigan, so it can get to these refineries in Canada. I just as soon have them keep their oil in Canada the whole time rather than running it through our state. And then in the meantime, we also need to set about decarbonizing our economy, because right now, people all across our state are using heating fuels. A lot of those heating fuels have to be imported because Michigan is just not and is never going to be a big fossil fuel producer. And that's why we need to actually turn our investments inward and invest in long-term solutions like clean energy that we know are not just healthier and better for the environment, but they put more Michigan people to work. and they give us energy independence. And most of all, in the long term, they're cheaper.
You're watching Speaking Truth to Power on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Please like, share, follow, and subscribe. And if you would like to join the conversation, our phone lines are open, and you can give us a call at 313-315-6018.
And as we battle the COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that misinformation can be just as deadly as the awful virus and spread just as quickly. Myths are spreading on the internet and social media, so it's important to know the facts and keep our community healthy. The vaccines are offered through Wayne County Public Health and scientifically proven to work. It's important that each of us get our vaccines scheduled as soon as possible. Visit waynecounty.com/ COVID-19 to get the latest information. And Jeff, I think one of the things people need to really understand too is that the pipeline not just does it run through one of the largest clean bodies of water, fresh waters in the world that we cannot replace, but it also runs through the home of indigenous people of Michigan who have been here for hundreds, thousands of years. So literally, you're taking a pipeline full of oil and you're running it. It's like running it through someone's front yard and going, you know what, you'll live with it. And I don't understand why that's been allowed to happen.
Yeah, well, as you probably know, Denise, I've got a lot to say about sort of the tribal connections here. I think that I'm the only member of a Michigan federally recognized tribe that's in the legislature. I'm a member of the Sioux Tribe of Chippewa Indians. I mentioned it from Sault Ste. Marie, or actually, I think that was you, Denise, that mentioned that. And yes, there are a number of tribes that have treaty interests in fishing rights to these particular waters. These particular waters themselves were sort of the heart of tribal culture for particularly the Odawa and the Ojibwa tribes that really revolved around the Straits of Mackinac for hundreds of years. And so, these tribes have treaty rights that they're trying to exercise as well. They were never consulted. They were never part of any agreement to give this Canadian company private use of the Great Lakes bottomlands, which they have rights to as well. And so they're suing to assert those rights. There's also a tribe over in Wisconsin that is, I believe it's the Bad River tribe, that is suing Enbridge over their access where the pipeline crosses a river of theirs that's within their tribal lands. And so that's also sort of a separate effort that's going on. And then I would also mention that there have been a couple different instances where folks have sent rovers or submarines or cameras down to the bottom of the bottomlands to look at this pipeline. That's one of the reasons that we know that the anchor supports that Enbridge is responsible for maintaining, have not been maintained properly. Anyway, as a part of one of those efforts, I'm sorry to go on, there were some archaeological sites found on the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. And I don't think there's a lot known about those yet, but that was kind of the last tribal issue that I thought I would mention is these, what look like human-made stone formations. And we're just kind of getting our, toe in the water, so to speak, on that information.
I am so glad that you mentioned that because we were going to say we were at a rally. What was that?
Wednesday.
At Kenny Park here in Detroit, Southwest Detroit, with some of the tribes here, and they mentioned how they took the rover down and they actually found artifacts, ancient artifacts,
10,000 years old, never been examined. No one knew they were there. And now it's like Enbridge is going, and
yeah, there's like whatever to you. So you and that's not good. And when we're having especially international companies, most people may not be aware, but Enbridge is an international company.
It's a Canadian
it's
company.
A Canadian company.
Right. It's
so it's
not an American
a company
company
in the United States. So how do our laws impact a company from another country? Do they have to abide by our rules and regulations?
Yes, but it gets very complicated. And as I'm sure you know, multinational corporations use these complications to their advantage at every turn. And so right now, what's happened is that the governor has said your easement is revoked and you need to shut down the pipeline. Enbridge has said we are going to continue to operate the pipeline despite what the governor has said about us violating the easement. So what's going to happen is this is going to play out in federal court. Enbridge is trying to assert that the state of Michigan cannot shut this pipeline down. Michigan is going to try to argue that Enbridge is out of compliance with the easement and needs to shut down. And just this week, the governor announced that what she's going to do as a part of this lawsuit is she is going to try to require that any profits that are made by Enbridge by running this pipeline illegally and out of compliance with the easement, are dollars that are are sort of rent that ends up getting paid to the state of Michigan because this company is just not following Michigan law. They're not complying with the terms of the easement, and they seem to think that they can just continue to flout the law and the rights of Michigan people as long as they want. But this will play out in federal court.
Now, Jeff, I just have one thing to say. I need for people to know that I am actually I actually belong to the Anishinaabe caucus, and I would be very interested to see if some of those funds that the governor plans to take could not actually be given to some of the nations that Enbridge has impacted. Because, I mean, when the pipeline comes into communities, what we look at is they're actually damaging land. They're stopping people from fishing and from hunting because I think one thing people
basically from eating,
from doing what they would normally do. But I think what people don't understand is, like in Michigan, we almost have like two parts of Michigan. We have this part where you can live every day and literally live off the grid and live on the land, and if you choose. And then we have this part where we have all the automotive and we have all the universities. And I think it's just a shame that you've gone to people's land and you've destroyed people's land and they've decided, okay, you know what? I'm afraid of what's going on. There might be cancer going here. There might be something going on. So I'm really actually going to relocate my land. So is there anything in the works that you think that some of this money that's being confiscated from Enbridge could actually be gone back? Not that you can ever make the tribes whole, because I mean, this is just like colonialism at its best, imperial colonialism at its best, going, we're not even recognizing your find of people of artifacts that are over 10,000 years old, and we're not even recognizing your right to have this land. So can there be something that actually goes back to the tribes? Not that you can ever be made whole from something like this.
It certainly could be, and it's a great idea. But I think that we're a couple steps before even seeing that money, and so that's a concept that I don't think has been floated thus far. But it does kind of bring me back to those archaeological sites. I mean, I don't know if people are aware of this, but there are some really interesting underwater archaeological sites sort of off of the tip of the thumb of Michigan, going out into Saginaw Bay. There are also some interesting ones in Petoskey, over in Petoskey Bay. And, what we're learning is that, many 10,000 years ago plus, water levels were lower. And, there were folks that were setting up stone structures out there in some of these areas that are now inundated with water. And they were using these for either trail markers or for a hunting purpose. And so, I think it's really fascinating that archaeologists are learning more and more about sort of the ancient life of Michigan. And I would hate to think that we would lose some of that precious history, that once it's gone, it's gone forever.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you about currently in Texas, you have a couple of your colleagues that are looking to charge a tax on electric cars because of they're not able to use gas, and the interest of families and corporations that own these oil dispensaries and companies. What are your thoughts on that? Charging a tax on individuals that have electric cars?
Yeah, so my sort of general philosophical view on that is that here in Michigan, we should seek to build the cars of the future, not to tax the cars of the future. Right. But unfortunately, here in Michigan, we do have special advanced vehicle taxes, and they come in really two forms. One, generally speaking, if you're buying an electric vehicle, it's more expensive on the sticker price, but then you end up saving money long term on the gas. And so because that sticker price is more expensive, your car registration is more expensive. So people who buy electric cars are already paying a little bit more on their car registration just because of that. But then in addition to that, the legislature back in, I believe it was 2015, it may have been 2016, passed something that at the time I called the Volt tax, which basically says that if you have a very fuel efficient vehicle or an electric vehicle, you pay an extra premium on your car registration every year. And so there are people in Michigan right now who are paying that electric vehicle tax of $100 or a couple $100 additional every year. And that's, very comparable to what they, wouldn't have been paying in gas tax if they had actually been fueling their car and paying for the roads in that way. And so, this idea has come up for many years. Some of my more conservative colleagues, frankly, have raised this issue that what if, electric cars start becoming more popular? Aren't these people sort of avoiding their responsibility to pay for the roads, since about, half to 2/3 of how we pay for the roads is paid for through gas tax? I think that's it's a fair point for them to be making. But when electric vehicles are such a small percentage of the total vehicles on the road, I think it's maybe a little early to start instituting that. But we've already done it here in Michigan. We already have an electric vehicle tax. And, I sort of think that's kind of like if Wisconsin had a special cheese tax, or if Idaho had a special potato tax, or if, Washington decided we're just going to tax airplanes. It seems like it's probably a long-term mistake for Michigan, because as the auto industry is making this major change, this major evolution, it behooves us to be ahead of that, and to, like I said, do everything we can to build the cars of the future, and so that we can continue to be producers in that regard. I think it would really redound to our benefit as a state and future prosperity.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that.
I do too. Now, Jeff, I would like to just jump ship for a minute. Can you tell us about the new expungement you've been working on, and why you think this was so important?
Yeah, and so we had a really interesting session over the course of the last 2 years, and we're just starting the 101st session, but the 100th session, the last 2 years, was an incredibly productive session on criminal justice reform. We passed a number of bills relative to reducing the unnecessary use of jails, changed warrant procedures, did a bunch of good things, I think. And one of the other major elements was this expungement legislation that you just spoke of. And really, that legislation provided potential relief to about 1 million people in the state of Michigan who currently have a criminal record for something that is relatively petty or something that's extremely old. And so let me just kind of give you a survey of what we're talking about. One sort of leg of the stool would be just petty stuff. So we had hundreds of thousands of people who had misdemeanors on their record for driving with license suspended or driving without insurance. And, this was essentially just one of the many ways that Michigan criminalizes poverty. And really what that did is that prevented people's ability to get back to work, or to seek more education, or to get housing. It was a barrier in a number of ways. And once again, these were petty crimes. So we just said that for those types of crimes, if they're sufficiently old, we're just going to blow them away automatically and get rid of them off your record.
Right.
We also said that for a whole host of other crimes, we're going to expand the opportunities for expungement in Michigan. And it used to be that Michigan was one of the most difficult states in the country to get a second chance, or to get your record cleared. And now we went from being one of the worst to being, one of the better states. And what we did is, it used to be that if you had more than one felony or more than 2 misdemeanors, you couldn't seek an expungement no matter what. You couldn't even go to the judge and say, here's what I did, here's how I've reformed my life, here's what the steps I'm taking now to contribute to my community. You just couldn't even get in the door. And so what we did is we changed that. We increased those limits, and without getting too into the weeds, we basically more than doubled those limits. And we did something else that was very important, which we said that we're going to allow something called one bad night. It was the name we gave it. And this was a legislation led by former Representative Sherry Gay Dagnogo. And this legislation basically said that if you committed a multitude of crimes within one action, then it would only be counted as one for the purposes of seeking expungement. The example that I like to give, because I think it's just a clean one, is that if I'm on my front lawn and I'm selling cocaine, I probably am delivering cocaine, I'm also probably maintaining a drug house. I also probably use my phone to set up the deal, so I'm engaged in some sort of criminal conspiracy. That's 3 felonies right there from what most folks would consider really one felony. You're selling drugs. And so what we basically did is that for the purposes of expungement, let's package those up and count those as one. And then in addition to all that, we passed some expungement relief for people who have cannabis crimes. So, as you know, Denise, I was very involved in the effort, Proposal 1, to legalize cannabis in Michigan. And one of the things that was the sort of unfinished work of legalizing cannabis in Michigan was to clear off people's records who have a criminal conviction for cannabis. And I don't think we've gotten all the way there yet, but here's what we accomplished last year. We basically passed a law that says that if you have a criminal record for possession or for use, which represents about 235,000 people in the state of Michigan, then you can apply no matter how many you have, and the judge shall grant that expungement unless they want to go on the record giving some sort of specific reason as to why you're still a threat to society. And so, that's going to provide relief to a whole lot of people. The folks who were left behind, and I tried to make amendments to get these folks cut in, were folks who have possession with intent to deliver or manufacture crimes on their record. That represents about 25,000 people. And I continue to point out that if we're going to make folks' records clear for crimes that are now legal activity, it's now legal for anyone to grow up to 12 plants per household. It's now legal for people to sell cannabis, and they're doing it every day. And there's 3 stores within walking distance of my house, and people are making money doing it. I don't think we should continue to hold it against folks who did that in the past. All right. And then here's the cherry on top of the sundae. I'm sorry for going on so long.
Before you
Please.
do that, you are watching Speaking Truth to Power on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Please like, share, follow, and subscribe.
Yes, and as we battle the COVID-19 pandemic, it's clear that misinformation can be just as deadly as the awful virus itself and spread just as quickly. Myths are spreading on the internet and social media, so it's important to know the facts and keep your community healthy. The vaccines offered through Washington County Public Health are scientifically proven to be safe. It's important that each of us get our vaccination scheduled as soon as possible. Visit Wayne County waynecounty.com/COVID-19 to get your vaccination schedule and to get the latest information on vaccines.
Yeah, Jeff, you're trying to get us in trouble here going over our time for our commercials and everything.
Yeah, Wayne County Public Health would be like, hey, we need to talk.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I'm sorry to be that guy. But just to finish the thought on expungement, when all these bills started moving, and when we started to see, really a bipartisan coming together around saying, let's provide a second chance to some of these folks who've committed petty crimes, there were some local youth justice advocates who came to me and they said, folks like Jason Smith at the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, folks like Linda Edwards Brown, a former family court administrator here in Washington County, they came to me and they said, look, this is great that we're going to provide these second chances for people who committed their crimes when they're adults. But what about folks who were never convicted of a crime as an adult, but they were adjudicated when they were a juvenile? And so what we did is in my office, we put together Clean Slate for Kids as a add-on to Clean Slate. So we passed those Clean Slate bills for adults, but we also passed some legislation, which was Senate Bill 681 last year and Senate Bill 682, that basically said that if you committed your crime with a juvenile, we're going to provide many more opportunities for that record to be sealed. And we're basically going to provide an opportunity for your record to be automatically expunged as long as what you did in the first place wasn't violent and you don't commit any new crimes for a couple of years after you're, graduate from the juvenile system.
That is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. You also do work with mental health. That's one of the things that you focus on in your platform. Why was it important for you to focus on mental health?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we've noticed here in Michigan, I think over the course of my whole adult life, is that we've been cutting holes in the social safety net, and people are falling through. And it is disgraceful that our jails and our prisons are our #1 providers of mental health service in the state of Michigan. And we desperately need a federal national healthcare plan that makes sure that people have physical and mental health care and access to those services here in our country. But in the meantime, there's a tremendous amount that the state needs to be doing to make sure that in terms of substance abuse, that we have an open door. I mean, right now, there are many, many, many people who are seeking help, who want to end their addiction, but who can't get into a bed, who can't find access to substance abuse treatment, while we've got most of our substance abuse treatment beds taken up by people who are on court-ordered treatment, who are the least likely to be successful. And then when you start talking about sort of the other side of that mental health coin, we are dramatically low in Michigan in terms of the number of mental health crisis beds we have for folks who are in extreme crisis. There are folks who end up getting stuck in the emergency room. There are, families suffering at home right now because there is no place to put their loved one in crisis. And I just think that's a disgraceful situation. It's an embarrassment to our state, and it ends up resulting in more problems in our criminal justice system. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to take this historic opportunity we have with the American Rescue Plan, with these Biden bucks, and invest them in these lumpy infrastructure investments like, more hospital beds for people in mental health crisis.
I'm glad that you mentioned that because here in Michigan, it's about 1.3 million adults that are impacted by mental health, and 1 in 5 youth that are impacted by mental health, in addition to about 17% of the prison population that suffer from mental health conditions. And even while they're incarcerated, they're not getting the care that they need. How can we as a state improve that mental health service within our prison system?
And I'd like to just add one thing to that also. And this is very sad. I'm sure, Dr. Thomas, you know this. Jeff and I are very lucky. We live in Washtenaw County. U of M is the only hospital in this state that can take youth for mental health. There's no other hospital emergency room. They actually have an emergency room, mental health emergency, is specialized for children. And that is so scary, especially looking at the pandemic. I mean, with things that happened, schools were shut down, kids' lives were like just stopped in their tracks. And and I'm sure, without divulging anything, you probably received a lot of phone calls from frantic parents. Where do I take my child? What do I do? And I've had friends of mine call me, and their kids are literally just having breakdowns, and they live the west side of the state, and there's no place they can take their child.
Yeah, since the pandemic, especially, there has been an increase in calls from for providers within Michigan for mental health services, and we're not even able to service everyone that's calling in. And just a few years ago, the mental health professionals came together to make sure that licensed professional counselors were even included so that we can continue to see this population. And I have to thank Lake's representative, um, Isaac Robinson, who was very instrumental in making sure that that happened. But now we're seeing this influx for services, and those needs aren't being met, in addition to not having the accurate amount of psychiatrists that can even see these individuals who may need medication. So we have a big mental health crisis here in Michigan. How can we get ahead of this?
Yeah, so this is a complex system. There's a lot of different moving parts. I would say that in addition to what I said about the state simply providing the opportunity for more crisis beds, I think that is sort of one element of it. But an even more important element of it is providing more support to the community-based programs that really keep people out of crisis, that keep people stabilized. And what I see here in the state of Michigan is that we provide so little in terms of those kinds of programs that people end up falling into crisis when they probably didn't have to. And so what that means is not just making sure that those programs exist, but make sure that people actually have access to the programs. And a big part of that is making sure that there's resources to pay the folks who are doing the actual work on the ground. And one of the things that has become really illuminated and highlighted by this pandemic is that, we've got these essential workers out there that our communities and our economy absolutely rely upon, and we treat them like garbage, and we pay them like they don't need to pay their own rent. And as a result, you kind of wonder, why is it that we can't find quality, affordable childcare? Why is it that we can't, have access to mental health support? Well, it's because we do not invest in the people who do that work. We don't respect their work with a livable and thriving wage. And then, finally, just to touch on the prison thing, I mean, it's maybe a bit of a out of left field, but you mentioned how do we improve mental health in the prisons? Part of it is just, making sure that there's, professionals there to provide that kind of mental health, and that there's space for the prisoners to, work with each other. But another element of it is the food in the prisons. We are so penny wise and pound foolish with the way that we treat these prisoners that we generate more mental health problems than would have to exist if we treated people humanely.
Right. And I don't want to just not include the workers in the prison systems, because over the past 10 years, there has been an increase of mental health issues, even with the officers that work within the prisons. More depression, more anxiety, more post traumatic stress. So we need to look at this from a holistic perspective of the inmates and the workers.
You know what? I'd just like to give a shout out to the Santa Barbara County custody deputies because they have found a way around that during the pandemic. So it's basically the deputies at the Santa Barbara prison and Santa Barbara, California. And they're doing a great job. And they brought this to light. They were like, hey, look, there's things going on. We need help here. And I think, I think as prison guards to actually step in and say, hey, we're willing to be here every day during this pandemic, but we need this. This is what we need for the people that are here. So I think that takes a lot of guts. And you know what? Kudos to them because they were there to do a job. But you know what? They also saw an issue that needed to be handled. And you have to respect those first
Absolutely.
responders who were not at home with their families or who were staying in their garages to, to do their job and to say, look, this is wrong and it's going to get really bad. So, Santa Barbara, good going, guys.
Yeah, and speaking directly to that issue, one of my colleagues just this week, I'm pretty sure it was Senator Sylvia Santana, offered up an amendment to include in our budget for next year some resources to do additional training for correctional officers. And part of that focus is on making sure that officers have the mental health support they need, and that part of the training includes trying to destigmatize the seeking of mental health service, by correction officers. These folks often deal with difficult, hard circumstances at work, and unfortunately, there's this stigma, this kind of, sometimes macho stigma around seeking help, which we need to break down.
Right. Now, if you are interested in joining the conversation, please call us at 313-315-6018. Our phone lines will be open for an additional um, 12 minutes. So if you are wanting to join the call, please do so now. Again, our lines are open. I want to switch gears a little bit while we're talking about mental health and our officers. I'm noticing that there's a lack of training even when officers go out to calls and they're dealing with a civilian that has mental health issues. We can look at was it Walter Wallace Jr. or Ricardo Mundez or Angelo what's it
Qu- Quit
Quinto
Queen. All right,
that
we're very
where
sorry about
office
that name.
I'm sorry for your family for mispronouncing your loved one's name, but we're noticing that officers are not trained to handle individuals that have mental health conditions. They're perceived as being disobedient or not wanting to do what the officers say. And we know that when someone that's having a mental breakdown, they're not cognitively present to even follow that type of command. So, what can we do about this training? But we have a call coming in, so let's take this caller. Caller, hi, you are speaking on the line with Speaking Truth to Power. Do you have a question or a comment?
For Senator Irwin.
Actually, I just have a comment about the show. I'm really enjoying the show, and I love what you guys are doing. And keep it up, and welcome, Senator.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Excuse me.
So,
Yeah, and just to try to take off on your question there, Dr. Thomas, you know, yeah, first I just want to say that training is important, but I don't want to ever let it go by without saying that it is necessary but not sufficient. Is a lot that we need to do to try to restore better relations between the community and the police, and training is just a small piece of it. But having said that, I do think that one of the things we know is that whatever field you're in, the training and the best practices improve over time. But here in Michigan, we require officers to go through the training academy when they're cadets, and then there's no continuing education required in Michigan.
Right.
Most states have that. Most states require their officers to go back for additional training. Now, some departments do this on their own, but what I've proposed in Michigan is that we do two things. One, we require continuing education. We require officers to go back and get exposed to more training, regularly throughout their career, so that as we learn more about what works, the officers can be exposed to that, and their training isn't frozen in time. And two, that training be improved. That training specifically include elements that will help them understand people who are in mental health crisis and how to de-escalate. That will help them to understand some of their own internal and implicit biases. That will help them understand that there are mental health resources available to officers, and that police officers, because of the stressful nature of their job, probably ought to be talking to someone about how their job is affecting their feelings and how they maintain that focus on keeping the community safe, despite the challenges that they face in their job. And so that was the legislation that I introduced last year as Senate Bill 945, and it's going to be reintroduced, I believe, this week, actually, together with some other legislation calling for things like independent investigations. For instance, when there's a situation where an officer is alleged that they've committed misconduct, that investigation really should be handled by an outside independent body that has at least an arm's length or more from that department. We also need policies that allow a police officer's certification to be revoked when they continue to abuse citizens. The law in Michigan right now says that you can only revoke that certification if the officer is literally convicted of a felony or a serious misdemeanor. And you know that in America, in order to be convicted, you have to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that we can hold, and we ought to hold, our police officers to a higher standard than that. And so that's why I'm soon to be introducing legislation that will say, that there are circumstances short of a conviction that should result in an officer's certification being revoked.
Right. And I think one of the things we need to look at is that people sort of act like, well, the police doesn't want this. I mean, do you really think that there are officers out there that are going, you know what? No, don't give me enough training so I can recognize when someone is in a crisis moment. No, don't give me enough training to make sure that I don't have to draw my weapon. So, because you hear a lot of that. Well, the police don't want this. I mean, they want to go home every night to their families, their friends, and their loved one, just like everyone else wants to go home. So, because I have heard that side of the argument, that's why I really wanted you to talk about the Senate bill. And a lot of them are just like, we're ill equipped. Give us the tools, give us the equipment to do our jobs better, and we will do them better.
well,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the perspective I hear from most police officers. But of course, we also see sometimes these sort of cowboy trainings that get done, and these us versus them warrior mentality approaches that some police trainers take. Which is why it's important that we not just have training, but that we have excellent training, and that we have citizens who are involved in the oversight boards that govern what training gets laid out there. And I just want to give Governor Whitmer some kudos, because about a year and a half ago, at the urging from some of us, she added some citizen members to the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. So while we push for more training, we know that there are some citizens who are involved in looking at that training and making sure that it's the kind of training that will promote more harmony rather than more of this us versus them mentality that I think is part of the problem when we see these incidents across the country, these tragedies that we've seen too often recently.
Right. And I actually think that there should be a policy where when there is a mental health call through 911, that there is a mental health professional that goes out on
Right.
that call with them. That should be a policy, standard policy across the board. Can you make that happen?
Well, I absolutely agree, and it's something that a lot of us have been talking about in the legislature, and I'm going to continue to promote. But I'll also point out that there are some local leaders who are really out front, in front of the legislature on this. Our community here in Washtenaw County passed a mental health and public safety millage a couple years ago, and those dollars are being used to develop those kinds of teams. And so, I would point out that Sheriff Jerry Clayton has been a leader in this regard, and I hope he continues to drive forward on that kind of progress, because that's exactly what we need. But we need folks to implement it at the local level with fidelity and with a mind towards the public interest.
Right, and we have a caller. Hi, state your name and you have a question and comment for Congressman Irwin.
Senator.
Senator.
Yes,
Earl.
yes, I
Earl.
do. Keeping up with mental health. My name is Vito, but keeping up with the mental health topic, I did have a question I haven't heard yet. Is there anything in place for, let's say, a police officer was removed from duty due to misconduct or due to misuse of power or anything that had to do with that? Is there any kind of way to track those people once you relieve them of duty? Because now they're back into the community, and then they can pretty much enact any of those type of, mental things they have. Is there any way we have to track them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to make an assumption that what you're asking about is sort of like, how do we make sure those people don't stay in the profession of law enforcement? And that's exactly what my bill that I was just speaking of is geared towards doing, by allowing the oversight body to revoke that certification from somebody. Because right now, the standard for that is incredibly high. And so what you see will happen in a lot of circumstances that, an officer will be accused of some sort of misconduct, rather than, go all the way through that process, disciplinary process within their department. They'll just leave and they'll go to a different department and sort of start the clock all over again. We can't allow that to happen. We got to make sure that there is, a basic level of accountability, just like we have in other professions. But in this profession, we need to make sure that that bar is even a little bit higher, because these are the only folks out there that are carrying around guns and have the power to take away your liberty. And so we need to hold them to a higher standard. And I agree with you that there's one other thing that we need to do that I think would help in this regard, which is make certain disciplinary records more transparent. And so that's another thing that we need to do to make sure that in these particularly heinous incidents, that these folks aren't able to abuse a citizen and then bury that information and then move on and continue to victimize people.
How about a national
Right, because there's a lot of
database
groups in the
like we have
community, and
with
you don't want hate groups forming or groups against others. But these former police officers got extensive training, so they have different information that regular civilians don't have. So I was just wondering if there's a way to track them in case they choose a different route and not necessarily try to join law enforcement, but try to join other groups that may be harmful to others.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, and what it reminds me of is some of the work that needs to be done on the front end. Some of my colleagues and myself have been pushing the departments and the state police to be more aggressive about making sure that we don't have white supremacists infiltrating our police force. I think that's a very serious problem, and one that we need to do more and put more attention into making sure we keep those sort of dangerous folks out of the police force. But I think your question begs an important need, which is to say, when these folks have committed these crimes, how are we making sure that they're not continuing to victimize others?
Exactly.
I think a national registry like they do with sex offenders is a good option.
Well, you know
what I mean? Something, because I don't think it's safe to not necessarily keep an eye on people who had power and tried to abuse those who didn't, and now they don't have a uniform no more to identify who they are. So I just wanted to call in. Great show. I appreciate all the work you're doing, Senator. I appreciate the show. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. You know what, Jeff? What we will do, especially in response to listening to this caller, what we'll do on our Facebook is we will connect people to your Senate bill. And if you want to add to it and have them call, their senators and their congressmen and say, hey, get behind this bill. This is important. We can actually, if you send us that information, we can actually help you push that out on Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. And we will make sure people know, and people know that there's support for that bill.
Great. No, I really appreciate that. And as I said earlier, we're getting ready to introduce a package of police improvement legislation coming up very, very soon. I've been working very closely with my colleague, Senator Chang, who is my colleague who serves with me on the Judiciary Committee. And so I'm excited about that legislation and the opportunity to get some things done, because it's incredibly important to speak truth to power and to raise the flag for what's important, and to stand up for what's right, and to introduce legislation that is on point. But it's also important to get some things done and to pass some bills that practically improve the lives of people here in the state.
And you know what, Senator Irwin, this concludes our time. But I tell you what, once you reintroduce that, is it okay for us to have you back on and you can talk to us about that? And we will definitely put this information up.
Well, absolutely. And I think you can tell that I like to talk. So happy to do it. And I appreciate your interest in these issues, because these are important issues. They're important to the future of ourselves, our families, our communities. And it's important to the lives of people who we'll never meet, who will walk this ground long after we're gone. And so I appreciate your interest, and always happy to chat with you about these issues.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Irwin. And thank everybody for listening and watching. You've been watching Speaking Truth to Power with Senator Jeff Irwin, Denise Kirchoff, and
Dr. Nakpangi Thomas.
And we will be changing time. We will actually be appearing on Saturdays from 10 to 11. And everyone have a really great
Starting in June.
Starting in June. Everyone have a great Sunday. Goodbye.